Hello, welcome to The Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. This is going to be a review of the first balance update and battle scroll that we've had for Age of Sigmar since the launch of Age of Sigmar 4. Now, I've done these for several years, and they normally vary in quality. What I'm going to try to do when I make this video is I'm going to try and discuss the problems and what has been happening in the game, and then what those fixes might be trying to target. I'm also going to discuss the changes that I would have made or would have liked to have seen changed instead, because some of these changes will not ever be enough, because Games Workshop have traditionally done pretty weak to pretty rubbish balance patches. That's been something that happened through Age of Sigmar 3 and Age of Sigmar 2. It got better in Age of Sigmar 3, but they generally have not been very good. And there's two factors that we like to judge them on. There's external balance, so the win rates of different armies. Is one army a 65% win rate and one army a 34% win rate? And therefore the external balance and how they work against each other. And then the internal balance, what they've done to make it so that you don't want to take one unit as much as you want to take other units. And that's a really important thing to talk about, because you don't necessarily want to have to take the best unit in an army. Sometimes you want to take different units. So we're going to talk about all of that, and I'd love to know what you think about these balance changes in the comments below. Do you agree with my takes? Do you think something different? How have your games gone? These are all things that we need to learn. The first thing I want to start out with is that you have to remember, when they write these battle scrolls and these balance updates, they do these normally weeks, up to sometimes months, before they publish them. That seems like a really odd thing to do when you're trying to keep a kind of constant update to make the game work better. It's a great point. Like, we kind of have done some sleuthing here on this one, and it does feel like this battle scroll was written something like 6 weeks ago, and therefore has been published now, which missed, and then it has been written 6 weeks ago with information from 6 weeks before. Seeing as Age of Sigmar has only been really out competitively for about 11 to 12 weeks, this means that they've lost quite a lot of data, and we're really seeing someone react to something in the past. However, the #1 headline from the battle scroll update is actually located in the article. So let's go talk about that now. If we scroll right to the bottom, this is a list of kind of like bullet point updates, and we're going to talk about this. Normally, the battle scroll updates and the balance patches happen every 3 months. Games Workshop have been fairly tardy several times over the past few years, with sometimes missing entire battle scroll updates and us having to wait 6 months. But they normally say that they're going to put an update out every 3 months, every quarter. However, we've got a new thing for Age of Sigmar 4. Up here, it says that there will be plenty more changes. With points adjustments on more than 250 units, updates to frequently asked questions and more, you can expect monthly FAQ updates toward the end of each month to adjust any issues that crop up, as well as bigger adjustments in our quarterly battle scroll updates. Now, this is quite interesting, and I'd love to know what you all think. There's a couple of bonuses and a couple of negatives here. First off, let's talk about the fact that actually having a monthly FAQ is good. We can answer a bunch of questions that maybe me, like a tournament organizer, or even me as a player, would want answering. So that's quite nice. A monthly FAQ means that there's someone who's slightly more consciously looking at the game every month, even if it's a few months behind. However, I think this is actually also a massive negative, because one of the things that we're going to see is it gets towards the end of the month, I'm about to go and play in an event or even play with my friend at the local club. Does the army that I've had painted, is it going to work in the way that I think it's going to work? So at the end of every month, there's this little bit of a worry as about how my army is working and if I can even run an event properly. That is, I think, the reason that they're doing it. The reason they're doing these monthly updates is because I think that they want to pull different levers to make you excited to buy new minis at the end of every month. We'll have to see. We haven't seen what one of those monthly FAQs look like yet. It might be just a real simple bunch of changes, or it might drastically change how some armies play, therefore making you need to buy more models or play more things. We'll see. We'll see. We don't know what that looks like. Okay, with that said, there's going to be monthly updates. I'd love to know what you think about that in the comments below. We know that this was written a few months ago. Let's go and have a review. Let's have a look at this balance update, and let's see what it looks like. Don't forget, I do a stat show every single. In fact, maybe we should start there. We do a stat show every Monday, me and Rob, and we look at event results from the weekend. So I've kept up with event results from all around the world every single week on the Age of Sigmar Stat Center. Therefore, I think I've got a pretty good idea of what units you would see taken, and especially in Taken and List that did really well, as I've read every single one of them out for the entire edition. But let's quickly look at the stats. So if we take out the entire GHB since the start of the game, this is what the factions look like. You can see the Nighthaunt are far too good at 65% win rate, and the Lumineth Realm Lords are up there at 59%. But sometimes, when you take all of this data together, what happens is you don't get a good picture of how the game has moved on, because sometimes it moves on. And if you look at the bottom, Maggotkin, Flesh Eater Courts, Skaven, Blazercorn, Ironjaws, all massively underperforming, with Sylvaneth at 44. If we look at the event results from only September, and again, shout out to Rob for all of this. If you look at September, you can see Lumineth Realm Lords are actually, only by a percentage point, the dominant army along with Nighthaunt, with Slaves to Darkness and Gloomspite Gitz being real problematic armies as well. And at the bottom, again, Ironjaws, Deepkin, Maggotkin, Flesh Eater Courts, Blades of Khorne, all still underperforming. So really, you want to really affect the Lumineth Realm Lords and Nighthaunt, 61%, 60%, and Slaves to Darkness. But you really want to do a lot of work to bring Deepkin, Ironjaws, Nurgle all up to the top. And let's see if they go and do it. So the first change that I'm going to focus on is a change that affects everyone in the game, and that is the change to the Honor Guard seasonal special rule. If you're playing Match Play Age of Sigmar, then in your General's Handbook, it's actually a General's Hand card, but that's not important. There are, at the start of each battle, you can choose your Honor Guard unit, which is one unit in your General's Regiment, to have one of 3 different abilities. I covered this in a previous video. Please do go check it out. Effectively, the one that we saw taken the most in Age of Sigmar was priority targets. This allowed one unit in your General's Regiment to get +1 to hit and +1 to wound against enemy units in the enemy General's Regiment, including the enemy General. The reason that this was so popular was specifically because normally this would be put onto shooting units. Shooting units would then be in the General's Regiment, and the General's Regiment would normally only have one unit in it. It would have the General and the General's Regiment. Then what would happen is that shooting unit could get +1 to hit and +1 to wound, and would use the cover fire command ability to shoot in the opponent's turn. Therefore, getting +1 to hit, +1 to wound in both of those phases, and also shooting out of phase or shooting out of turn twice. This became incredibly dominant, and we've seen this in multiple different armies. Lumineth Realm Lords, for instance, with Sentinels, Tzeentch with Skyfires, Stormcast with Long Strikes, and multiple other types of units. And so it's become very, very, very effective as a meta pick, as like a win path. So what they've done is they've changed this rule up. What they've done is you still add one to hit rolls and wound rolls for attacks made by models in the Honor Guard unit, but that target only the enemy general, so same as before, or the enemy Honor Guard unit, and no longer all of the other units in the General's Regiment. This is a quite good change, although I would have liked, and they also need to be within 12 inches. So what they've done is they've effectively reduced the effectiveness of shooting. So your long-range shooting isn't going to be as good because you've got to be within 12 inches. And then is only going to be affecting 2 units versus maybe all the units in the enemy General's Regiment. Let's talk about a couple of things on what this will do to list writing, because list writing is going to significantly change because of this update. The first thing, though, let's focus on, and what I would have done is I would have just made it so it's only melee attacks. I don't really know why they wanted to give a buff to shooting, but there we go. So that's a bit. I know that they've reduced the effectiveness of shooting, but either way. Okay, what is this going to do to the game? Okay, so what happens in most lists that I've seen in competitive settings is you've had the general, and your general has to be, your general is the general unless it's a war master, in which case a war master has to be the general. This has created this kind of really odd list building system where what people have done is they've had their war master, and because war master units normally also have all of the key faction abilities built into them. Usharan is a good example. He's such a good force multiplier for an army that Usharan having the War Master keyword means that he is your general and therefore is targetable by priority targets. That's why it's always been so effective. A Slann is another good example. In order to bring models back from the dead and have a 3-cast wizard, you'll have a Slann. A Slann is a War Master and therefore is more susceptible to being hurt just because in list writing, you have to have your War Master be your general. and therefore is targetable by the seasonal rules. So even though they've baked all of the best rules into your War Master models and then made it so your War Master has to be the general, they then immediately made War Masters be like targetable by this. So now maybe you won't get War Masters shot quite as much. Visic fans, by the way, for Skaven, over the moon at the moment, over the moon with that 5-up save. Maybe they won't get shot as much. But what this does mean is you now could get list writing mean that more units are going to go into the General's Regiment. Because not all of the units in the General's Regiment are targetable by priority targets, what you might have is more units in the General's Regiment. And what this means is you'll have more armies that are a 1-drop. What this means is you will only drop a single regiment or a couple of regiments, and therefore you'll have a race to who can drop the least army units first. Previously, because you didn't want all the models in the General's Regiment, you didn't do that. And therefore, that has gone away, that kind of like worry, or kind of worry has gone away, and now people are going to be racing. And you see more 1-drop armies. And 1-drop armies mean that they get to go first, they get to go do their battle tactic, grab their objectives, and then they give you the turn, and then you have got a turn where you don't want to get a priority roll into turn 2, because then you won't be able to do a battle tactic in turn 2. So you're going to not want the double. So then you're playing a losing point game from the first turn. It's pretty interesting. So that is a big structural change to how lists are going to be built, lists are going to be designed, and lists are going to work. Although in my opinion, it's not enough of a change, and I would have really liked to have seen it just be melee only and not be shooting units. So that's the first change that we're going to talk about. The next thing that we're going to look at, which affects everyone, is manifestations. There is a change to Morbid conjuration we'll talk about in a moment, but manifestations. They've made a change to how they work. No more than one friendly wizard or priest can attempt to summon the same manifestation per turn. So you cannot attempt to summon the same manifestation. They've replaced that, sorry. They've replaced that with no more than one friendly wizard or priest can attempt to summon the main manifestation per turn, and a friendly wizard or priest cannot attempt to summon a friendly manifestation that was removed from play in the same turn. You might be asking yourself, I didn't know that was possible. It is, absolutely. What you do in your turn is you use the banishment ability, you banish a manifestation, and you can cast it again. But right now, that is gone. The reason that was used, it was something like Stormcast Eternals would use their Comet. They would drop that down, then they would do all their damage, then they would banish it, and they would recast it. That's how they would work. So that's how it would work. And they wouldn't do that in the same turn. They would banish it from a previous turn and then recast it in that turn. So that's what they're trying to stop. Big question for me is, I don't think this is remotely enough to deal with manifestations. Let me talk about the fact that I'm bringing a personal opinion to this, and I did cover this in my manifestations video. Should we get rid of them? What should we do about manifestations? I'll just say that I like Age of Sigmar to be a game of soldiers, you know, whatever they might be, even if they're a lizard or a demon, battling against each other. And the not very well sculpted manifestations being the center of this game feels a little bit weird, especially when you have like an 80% pick rate from Morbid conjuration, especially when we're going to come back to that in a minute. We'll come back to that in a moment because that has seen some changes. I would have preferred to have seen wizards only able to summon one manifestation per hero phase. I think that would have been a lot more effective, and it would have really reduced how effective they are. Because when you have things like Teclis, or you have something like a Slan, or, you know, like Nagash, and they've got all these pluses to cast, or they can just cast at a certain value, they can still drop down all those manifestations in a single turn. And that is overwhelming, in my opinion. It really makes them the forefront, especially because they're all free, of the game, and will continue to be so, and this isn't enough of a change. This is just having a small effect on a certain section of the game, which I don't really love. They have done something to help you banish manifestations, where you add one to the banishment roll for each additional enemy manifestation on the battlefield after the first. What happens is, in your turn, you can use the banishment ability to try to get rid of an enemy manifestation. This feels really good, but you actually give up one of your casting levels to be able to do a banishment. Therefore, you are reducing you're reducing down that player's power level and ability to do their own spells or even cast their own manifestations. So that really isn't much of a buff. You are probably more reliably going to be able to get rid of some of like the aggressive manifestations like Purple Sun, but you aren't going to be able to get rid of something like the Cronspine Incarnate because there won't be other manifestations on the board to give you pluses to banish. Therefore, it's still as difficult to get rid of as it previously was, which I think is a shame. The other major change that they've put out here is for faction terrain, but This is just telling you if you can or cannot use fight abilities and where you can place units on the board. The thing that it isn't doing, which I think is really important for Age of Sigmar and for players who want to use their faction terrain, is have it so that you can't deep strike within 9 inches of a piece of faction terrain. The reason that this is super, super important is because if I was running my Loon Shrine, which is really important to how my entire army works for Gloomspite Gates, but any of the faction pieces, what happens is I have to be 9 inches away from enemy units, but not the faction terrain. So what I can effectively do is I can literally drop within 0 inches, not on top of, but right next to a piece of faction terrain, but 9 inches away from an enemy unit. And then what I can do is I can roll a charge. Even a double 1 is still going to get me into a charge range of the faction terrain because I'm not considered to be locked in combat with it. This means that I can just, start hitting the terrain, which is really bad because I don't want you to hit my faction terrain. But also it means that you are going to be able to get a smaller charge. Then you'll be able to move your, let's say you get a 6-7 inch charge. I move my 7 inches and then I can do a pile in, but that might make me be able to be close enough to the enemy unit that I'm going to be able to swing at them with my 3-inch range, which is bad. So ultimately, the terrain pieces are actually better for the opponent, especially deep striking armies, than they are. And seeing as they are quintessential to how some armies play, like Gloomspite Gitz, like Sylvaneth, it would have been nice to have seen them give some bonuses to these faction terrain or made it so that you can't just land next to these faction terrain. I can even just use a faction terrain to charge at it and then go grab an enemy or go grab an objective of my opponent while having done like a 3-inch charge, which is dumb, and they shouldn't let that happen. So I would have liked to have seen that change. They didn't do that, so there we are. The next change, again, is a universal change for everybody, and this is the change to being able to take all-out defense from the covering fire command. So the command covering fire allows you to shoot in the enemy turn, but the way it was worded, you weren't able to use all-out defense against it. It's a tad pedantic the way it's worded, but the game is now designed pedantically. It has a declaration, it has an effect, it has steps for reactions. It's intentionally designed in a pedantic manner. Therefore, the way it worked previously is you weren't able to all-out defense because you weren't electing a target. Therefore, they've changed that so you can now all-out defense, and they specifically call that out. This change allows reactions such as all-out defense to be used in response to covering fire. Now, you might not have been aware that that was a problem, but it was, and it was something that, because what happens with tournament players is they play to the letter of the rule, and the rule says you can't, so you don't. And that's how it works. You can't imply intent because that's silly. And now they've said, obviously we meant that, we've changed it, great change, 10 out of 10 from me, well done. The next change is to everyone's favorite manifestation law. Manifestations are the endless spells which are free in points, and therefore the opportunity cost for them is all the same. You get to choose one manifestation law, so you're going to choose the best one. And the best one, by a long mile, for everyone who chose it, was the Morbid the Morbid Conjuration, as it's affectionately known. I am so bored of reading this out. It's unreal every single time. What changes did they make? Well, it still does not cost points. It's still free. So you really argue, the real question is it still as good as it was before for free compared to the other ones? The first change that they made was to summon a Suffocating Gravetide, which went from a 7 to cast, or whatever it was, to an 8 to cast. So it's more difficult to cast. Now, this is actually a worse change because the armies that are good at casting the Morbid Conjuration spell lore are the armies that are already good at casting. That, like Teclis, Nagash as an example. They're already good at casting at a high casting value. And therefore, they're better at casting at a high casting value, and therefore more likely to get this spell off. Well, who this does affect is the armies that were already not good at casting spells. And those armies who were already not good at casting spells already weren't necessarily getting these spells off, and therefore probably were choosing something like Cronspine Incarnate as their manifestation lore instead. So this has actually just made it so that maybe occasionally you don't get it off as much, but it just helps more magic-dominant armies, which were already being very abusive of the Morbid Conjuration spells anyway. They've also changed Malevolent Maelstrom. Now, this is a good change. This is a change where Malevolent Maelstrom, when you cast it, anything that dies or if a spell casts within a certain range of it, it ticks up a little number next to it. When it finally gets to a 6, it does a ton of mortal damage to everyone within 9 inches. Now, it used to be, though, that being able to use it was elective. Now, when it does get to 6, you must activate it and fire it off. So there you go. That's the change to Maelstrom. So they've made Maelstrom a little bit worse. They've also changed Suffocating Gravetide and Purple Sun to no longer be able to move into combat. That was something they did in the last update, which is what I said. And they've also removed Wild Form, which was if you attempted a banishment on the Purple Sun, then it took 6 damage instead and didn't die from the Purple Sun. So they removed that, and they were like, that's too strong. Unfortunately, none of this is a change to probably the best spell, which is Soul Snare Shackles, which being able to cast in your opponent's turn is devastating and incredibly good. But, you know, Purple Sun and Gravetide are still great spells that you can cast, and maybe you'll switch to a different spell lore, but either way, if you're a good spellcasting army, you're still probably going to take these because they're very effective. And Purple Sun's a little bit easier to get rid of, but who cares? Because they're just going to cast it again. And therefore you're fine. So I think they haven't really thought that through, and something they should think about more. And I still think this is as popular going forward. Maybe people take Cronspine Incarnate more. I don't know. But I think they've not done anything as much as this. And I would really like to see the effectiveness of all of the manifestations grossly reduced, or I'd like to see them cost 100 points to take, something similar, because I don't think this is enough of a change, and you're still going to see it absolutely everywhere. I also should update that Ravanax Gnashing Jaws, which is a manifestation that was in a different spell lore, also lost Wild Form, really paying for the sins of Purple Sun in that situation. Now we're going to go through each one of the factions one by one, and we're going to talk about all of the changes that they have had. First thing we're going to do is look at the rules changes, and the first army we're going to look at is Cities of Sigmar. Cities of Sigmar have had a change to Free Guild Fusiliers. They changed their rule because previously what would happen, I just put it here. Previously what would happen is you got 2 shoot modes for Free Guild Fusiliers. You got the fortified position and the mobile position. What used to happen is you would tag the fusil, you would tag the unit, and they wouldn't be able to use their mode, which let them shoot into combat. Therefore, because they had to use the fortified position ability. Instead, you can now use the other version, and you can shoot in combat. And that's the change. So they made Fusiliers good, which is cool. As to points changes, no points changes, and this will become a common theme that you'll see. There are some points changes. A Steam Tank Commander got 30 points cheaper, if you're excited. Dreadlord on Black Dragon, 20 points cheaper. But none of those are particularly effective. I think what's really good, if you're a Cities of Sigmar player, is that your army is very cheap. Very, very cheap. You can get a lot of wounds on the board. You've got a lot of units that are very cheap. Arguably, they're cheap because they're not super great, but they are very cheap, and you can get lots of bodies. And there were no points changes on that front. Also, fans of the Hammerers, because they've become very popular in competitive play, they haven't gone up points, which is nice. Love to see that. None of the Dark Elf stuff has gone up points as well, which is good. So generally, Cities of Sigmar, you've been nerfed. Not nerfed, you've been buffed by this update. So Cities of Sigmar players, big thumb. Next army we're going to do is Daughters of Cain. Daughters of Cain have had one rules change, which is to their battle formation, the Shadow Patrol. And the change is that previously what you would do is you pick an infantry unit on a 3-up, you could teleport it in your movement phase. They've changed it so it's only once per turn across the army, so you can't do it multiple times. But they've also taken the core keyword away from it. What this means is if you fail the 3-up, you are still going to be able to move that unit. So that's the change down here. That's what they previously didn't have as a change, and now they've changed that, which is great. Good for Daughters of Cain. The point changes for Daughters of Cain are very similar to Cities of Sigmar. Nothing got more expensive, which is really good, and some units got cheaper. And maybe Cruthessa, the Crone Seer, is worth revisiting at 20 points cheaper, potentially. Life Taker's being 10 points cheaper as well than Heartrenders for battle tactics. Maybe that's a choice that you want to go for. But other than that, I don't think anything got cheap, and it's really worth talking about. If we have seen anything be super popular, it's been Witch Elves with the paired blades, or we've seen Doomfire Warlocks be super popular, and we've seen Bloodstalkers and Bloodsisters still be really popular as well. Ultimately, when you have that faction ability to strike twice with infantry units, those are the units you're going to see taken. And so my review for Daughters of Cain is big thumb up. Next army we're going to look at are Fire Slayers. Fire Slayers got one rules change, which was to an Auric Runeson on Magmadroth, where its ability to stack its attacks are now cumulative if they kill enemy monsters. That's not going to make a big change to the game. And then points changes are very minimal. No points up thumbs, but some points down. Battlesmith down, Doomseeker down, Grimhold Exile down. Don't think you're ever going to save enough points to get you an extra unit. So really, they're a nothing burger, but might give you the opportunity to upgrade one of your units to like a slightly stronger unit, depending on where the points sit. But no real changes. So nothing negative, so you're going to get a thumb. Congratulations, Fire Slayers. Next army we're going to look at are Deepkin, which is pretty good because Games Workshop forgot about them. They have got some some points changes, but no rules changes. They are perfectly formed as they are. Points changes are points down on the Achillean King, points also down on the Leviathan and the Alapex, with Thralls being like an incredibly competitive 110 points for a unit of 10. But Deepkin aren't doing particularly well in the game right now. And therefore, these points changes and rules changes aren't going to do anything to change that. So I'm going to give these guys a thumb down because they're not doing very well and they've had nothing to increase that. And so sad for them. Next up is Kharadron Overlords. And again, no new rules for Kharadron Overlords, but they have had a couple of bonuses. The first bonus is that they have not changed Covering Fire, which is the ability to shoot in your opponent's turn, to 2 CP. Therefore, bonus to KO, which I love. They've also got points down as well with the Gun Hauler, which was fairly popular. Engine Riggers and Skywardens also going down points. And then none of the units that people were taking a lot of, specifically Thunderers, going up points. So these are all bonuses. Kharadron Overlords are also considered or are suspected to be a really poorly performing army, but they've actually won a couple of GTs and performed well at different events. So points not going down, being able to play well, no rules changes, and nothing making your army worse and your army doing okay. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a thumb up. Kharadron Overlords on the up. Next army is Lumineth Realm Lords, the best performing army in Age of Sigmar 4 this month so far. Okay, so they've had one rules change, which is to their battle trait, to some of their battle traits. Well, they've had more than one rule change, but that's the first one. And the first change is to Shining Company. For the rest of the battle round, subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks that target friendly Venari units that have not charged this turn and have not been picked as the target of Power of Heesh ability this battle round. Okay, what change does that mean? Number one, this means that you cannot charge and be -1 to hit, which is really good. So that's taken away, which is a big nerf. Big nerf. It also means that you can't be -1 to hit and then you can't also be able to benefit from Power of Heesh, which is where you get exploding 5s on your weapons. So it's actually a double nerf to 2 different abilities army-wide, which is pretty strong. So they lost a lot of minus to hit, especially if they've charged. So it's actually really impactful and actually a pretty good change. We love to see that. They've also done a rules and timing update to Leora Ulthari. I definitely said that wrong anyway. The Warden of Umetrica. Effectively, previously, you were able to not spend a command point on all-out attack, but it was a reaction, is now a passive, so it's usable in multiple phases. Which is good. This does mean that Leora also is probably going to be super popular because she's going to be able to give out effectively all-out attack. Command point is not going to be... She's going to be able to use all-out attack for a unit and not spend a command point in multiple different phases, which is pretty strong, ultimately. So that's very good. And lastly, there was a quick points update... quick rules update to the Shrine Luminor, but I'm not going to get into that because they're elves. Okay, points changes. Points changes were pretty severe, but that feels like that's a really good thing because Lumineth were really popular. The severe points the places where they did severe points changes, I apologize, was to the River Blades. They went up 20 points. They were super popular. You would almost always see River Blades in lists. Dawn Riders, which went up 20 points. Blade Lords, which went up 10 points, which you'd also often see many Blade Lords. They also put up the Wind Chargers by 20 points and the Spirit of the Wind by 10 points. Now, I have read a lot of Lumineth Realm Lords lists over the past few weeks, and they would almost always have the same units. You'd always have Severith, 2 Spirits of the Wind, sometimes 1, sometimes 2. They would sometimes have Dawn Riders, but Dawn Riders were not the popular picks, or not the popular picks that I saw. They would often have Blade Lords. They would always have a unit of 20 Sentinels. And maybe the change that we've seen to the ability to get +1 to hit, +1 to wound to the Centaurs is going to shut them down. But I personally think a 2 CP to be able to do shooting in your opponent's turn would have also reduced their effectiveness. Either way, they're still incredibly effective, and they didn't change points. So Lumineth players feeling really good. The Caligrave went up points. That's a whatever. The Enlightener went up points as well. Techlist didn't go up points. None of the Stone Guard went up points. I've seen Stone Guard lists win really big as well. So in my opinion, and we might see people not agree with me here, but in my opinion, Lumineth Realm Lords are actually better when we get to Nighthaunt being worse now, stronger, and I think might be the dominant army in the game as is. So I think that's what we're going to go for. The rules changes for Seraphon, which is the army we're going to cover next. The only rules change that we've seen is taking the core keyword away from the Eternal Star Host Celestial Translocation ability, which means that if you fail it, you can still move after. That's what that means. For points changes, we didn't see anything overly aggressive, especially in the units that Seraphon players really want to run. Okay, so Croak came down 30 points, but you very rarely saw Croak ever played. You did see the Saurus Scarvet on Agrodon go up points, but again, not overly popular. And the unit that was popular that saw play were the Agrodon Lancers. They went up 10 points to 220 points. So seeing as even if you were to run 12 of them, it would cost you 40 points in a list. There's no dramas there. The huge news, if you're a Seraphon fan, though, is that the Hunters of Haunchy with Starstone Bowlers went up 0 points. They could maybe double in points, and I would still take 2 units. So that is insane, and you've got to be really happy. Also, I generally saw people moving away from Lancers and moving to taking more Kroxigor. Kroxigor also didn't change points. And there's always been a really good argument that if you would like a really good cavalry unit, that you take the Raptidon Chargers and also maybe the Raptidon Hunters instead of the Agrodon Lancers. And they also didn't change points, with the Raptidon Hunters actually going down points. And they're a very good cavalry unit and are very effective, which is really good. Saurus Guard going up 10 points feels really miserly because you really need to protect your Slann, because the ability to bring models back from the dead is located only on a Slann, and Saurus Guard is the only way to really protect them. So I don't really know if that feels fair. There we go. I got to shout out the Spawner Chotek going down 20 points. I want that to be good. I want that to be good. And I don't think even at 20 points cheaper it is. So Bastiladon with the Archosotek and Solar Engine also go down points as well. I really like the Rampage on the Bastiladon with the Archosotek. I think that's really excellent. So I would say that if you're a Seraphon player, that you actually are really happy right now. Everything's looking good for you. You didn't get any points updates. Your army is doing middling to okay. I think that's because people are still painting the units that they need. But I think Seraphon are doing can do well. You just got to work really hard to do it. They're not broken. They're a really good, honest army for the first time in a long time. So big thumb up for Seraphon players. Next army is Stormcast Eternals. Okay, Stormcast Eternals. They have got a massive roster. And if ever there was a place where you could point to a book and say, this has got an internal balance issue, it's going to be Stormcast Eternals. Also, maybe Slaves to Darkness. They have got some rules changes. First one is a battle formation to change to a battle formation, which basically means that they've removed the core keyword. So, like the other things, you could do either do a teleport or do a move, whichever, which is good. And then they've also changed Praetors. Praetors were able to nominate a unit that they were going to bodyguard, but they couldn't do that if they weren't deployed, right? And so they've now changed that, so if they're in reserve, they can still use their ability, because Stormcast Eternals not being reserved is weird. So that's a good change for Praetors, which was super popular, especially in a Krondys meta. Everyone is running Krondys. So hot right now, because he's a 2-cast wizard. He's also a good monster and a bunch of other stuff. And Praetors were great for making Krondys be very survivable. So, boom. And then we have the points updates for Stormcast Eternals. And these are so nominal it hurts. Ionis went down, Karazai went down, nobody cares about that. Imperator down 10. They did put, and this is quite importantly, they put down the Lord Terminus down by 20 points. Only another 100 points to go, and he might see play, which would be cool. They did drop down Vanda's Hammerhand. They dropped down Annihilators by 10 points. Now, Annihilators down by 10 points is actually a thing, because they're 170 points now. You can maybe take multiples of them. They're not that good anymore, but, you know, there's an option. They dropped a bunch of Dracoths, like the Concussors, Desolators, and Tempestors, but not the Fulminators. And these are all really good options. So genuinely 20 points cheaper there is not bad. They put Libs down 10, but whatever. They put Reclusians down 10. And interestingly, Reclusians have started to gain some real traction. Started out in Northern Ireland with Colin Cochrane running Reclusians, only person I've seen do it. And then this weekend just gone, the Reclusians, or at least a single unit of 6 Reclusians, again, was able to do really well, I think, in Norway. So now it's started to travel, same as when we talk about OCR Bone Reapers, we've started to see the Mortek Crawler list start to spread around and people start to run them. So them going down 10 points is okay. Stormdrake Guard down 20, you're not going to take a load of those. And Vigilers, which again is a unit you would see almost like commonplace in Stormcast Eternals, because their ability to give +1 to hit out to your army was very good. So you would see Vigilers a lot. You wouldn't see loads and loads of Vigilers, but you would see some Vigilers. So Stormcast Eternals were also performing okay. They've got some 4-1s. I don't think they've got any 5-0s, but they weren't doing terribly as an army. They have their army book coming up, so you're going to get some new units also. Maybe that'll unlock the style of play that you need to play. So that'll be interesting to see when the new book comes out. But for Stormcast right now, big thumb. Loads of love. Next army we're looking at are Sylvaneth, and they got a pretty drastic overhaul. I would say, having played Sylvaneth at an event myself, that I think the entire book could probably be rewritten from the ground up. Reminds me a lot of the keyword bingo that you used to see in the old Gloomspite Gits book in 2nd edition. It's very much like a layer of stuff all built around your wildwoods, and those wildwoods are difficult to place, and also they are really fragile, giving your opponent charge options, tactics, a bunch of stuff. And so they've started to try to fix some of these things in the rules updates, and let's talk about those now. And Sylvaneth weren't doing terribly, though. I just point that out. Sylvaneth were doing kind of mid-table and were doing okay, right? But they're an incredibly hard army to play. Right, so the first thing they did was they changed the infinite, it's not called infinite, unlimited spell Tree Song, which is one of the spells from the spell lore for Sylvaneth. What they did was they extended the range from 18 inches to 24 inches, which is pretty good. And they changed it when you set up a wildwood, because this spell would let you set up a wildwood on the board as long as there weren't more than 3 on the board. And a wildwood is made of 3 different individual pieces, which is super important. We'll come back to in a bit. So those 3 pieces would be set up, but normally on the Games Workshop maps, which they provided with the GHB, you had to be 3 inches away from the objectives and 3 inches away from terrain, and it left you with very little space. So they've changed it so that you can try to cast these spells at a longer range, 24 inches, and they've changed it so that you can set them up within an inch of terrain. And that is a really, really good change, because that means you're going to be able to get more of these wildwoods on the board, and you'll be able to get them into easier locations effectively. That's really good. That's really excellent. That's a really nice change. That's a big buff for the Sylvaneth army. The problem probably is that wildwoods are this incredibly techie piece where your opponent can use them to, as I've said before, charge or countercharge at them and be able to use them for additional movement. And so it's so hard to use the wildwoods really well. And the wildwoods don't really give you tons of buffs. They give you some teleports, but other armies just have teleports for free. And that's why I could do a Sylvaneth deep dive at some point, but I think the whole book needs a rewrite. But there are still even more bonuses. The first one is actually the next bonus is to Awaken Wildwoods themselves, where they have now gained a 5-up ward save, which is wicked. Now, as I've said, they start as there's 3 individual pieces, and they need to form they need to touch tips, which is pretty funny to say. They need to touch tips, and so you can either have 1 piece, 2 pieces, or 3 pieces, and you're able to add +2 health for each individual piece you add after the first, and this is another massive change, you increase the range of friendly abilities you increase the range of models that need to be wholly within 6 by 3 inches up to 9 inches or 12 inches. So if you got the ability to strike and fade or do a teleport while you're wholly within 6 inches of wildwood, now if you've got a 2-piece wildwood, it's going to be 9 inches. Got a 3-piece wildwood, it's 12 inches. So that's another massive bonus for the army. A nerf that they've just put out has been Alarielle has now got her ability to only be allowed to be done once per turn per army. Because previously, she was able to bring herself back from the dead. That's what her ability did. And in addition, she could then bring another unit back from the dead because she was a replacement unit who hadn't used her ability. So now she can no longer do that and instead just brings a unit back from the dead. But another bonus in this situation, because you might not have known that they could have done that anyway, a bonus is that you only allocate 6 wounds to a monster when you bring it back for the dead. This is really good because, A, this means your monsters don't have as many wounds allocated to them because you can bring monsters back with, like, some wounds allocated. But it also means that you can bring the Lady of Vines back from the dead, who previously, because it was 8 wounds previously she couldn't come back because she would be brought back and she would immediately be killed. But now you can bring the Lady of Vines back, sure, only with 2 health left, but you can bring her back from the dead, which is pretty good. So all good changes. Lastly, another bonus to the army is that they've taken the Manifestation Vengeful Skull route and they've changed the fact that it'll count as a wildwood. They've changed its ability to passive. So now it's going to be a floating, awakened wildwood that's floating around your army. So the TLDR, you're going to be able to put more wildwoods down. You'll be able to put bigger wildwoods down. Those wildwoods will be more survivable, and you've got the ability to put even more wildwoods out. Is this going to be enough to improve how the army plays? We'll have to see. In addition, they also reduce the points on some units. Drycher, who you never see, Archrev, who you never see, Tree Lord Ancient, who you never see, and a Warsong Rev, who you sometimes see. But they also put the points up on Belthanos by 20 points, a unit that you always see. I really think that Kurnoth Hunters being 220 points, 200 points, while Rotguts with a 3-up save, 5-up ward save are 190 points, even after the points adjustments. I think you could have seen these units come down a little bit more points-wise, and I think that would have been really good. So Sylvaneth are going to get a thumb up for some big changes, but ultimately it's a book that needs a ground-up rewrite, in my opinion. So that's all of the Order factions. Now we're going to move into the Chaos factions. Beast of Chaos got some points adjustments, definitely. The Dragon Ogre Shoggoth got a little bit cheaper. Dragon Ogres got even cheaper. They were really popular, but you know, for the 8 Beast of Chaos players, they're going to be over the moon. This is a cow noise. I thought that was funny. So next, we're going to look at the Blades of Khorne. And the Blades of Khorne are not doing great in Age of Sigmar 4. Maybe for a variety of reasons, and we could go and discuss this another time, but they're not doing well. And so the litany of points adjustments that they've got, they did have a quick rules change to the Wrath Axe, but it's not that important. The points drops have been, you know, in some cases pretty severe. For instance, Wrathmongers only went down 10 points. And I know in other lists I've said, oh, it's not that important. But 10-point change of Wrathmongers, if you start taking, you know, 30 Wrathmongers, you're going to have saved yourself 60 points. I don't think you are going to do that, but, you know, lots of those units have come down like that. So taking multiples is kind of interesting. I don't think there's anything that's super cheap. Like Scarbrand came down 20 points. Some of the characters came down a little bit more points as well. Maybe the biggest change is the fact that your opponent is going to be slightly less effective with being able to shoot in their turn as well as your turn, which is a real death knell for the Khorne army, which normally has a bad armor save and doesn't have tons of wounds on the board. But yeah, a big points drops all around, but I don't think that's enough. You'll have to let me know what you think. But I'm unfortunately going to say not enough for the external balance of the army, so I'm giving it a thumbs down. Next up, Disciples of Tzeentch, and they had some pretty significant changes to their rules and some points changes as well. We'll go through them in order. The first one is their battle trait, which was the Burning Weird Flame. Previously, you would do D3 mortals on a roll of a 2 or a 3, and a 1 would stop that unit from burning. However, that's changed now. It's just D3 mortals. So you can also just do 1 mortal damage. It's quite rare to be able to do in these times. And that's really good. So this means units are going to continue to burn until they no longer burn. So this is really pretty good. They also changed in the spell lore. They also changed the spell Shield of Fate. And they changed it so that you could only cast the spell on a Disciple of Tzeentch unit, where previously it was friendly. So you could have stuck it on like something like a Gargan as an example, or a unit from a Regiment of Renown. So that's a nice change as well. They also changed the Chaos Spawn of Tzeentch, and so that you don't always need to set him up in reserve, and sometimes could set him up on the board. But if he does so, he can't then be relocated anywhere else on the board. So that's a nice little change in addition. Another big change to Tzeentch was they changed the manifestation specifically to Tzeentch, the Burning Sigil of Tzeentch. I said that so many times then, Tzeentch. Importantly, there's been two big changes. Number one, instead of starting affecting units in the movement phase, it affects units in any hero phase, so every hero phase. And then they've changed the ability so that it has a positive for your army always and a negative for your army always. So it is a massive glow up. What you do is you roll 2 dice and you pick either result, then you apply the corresponding effect for the rest of the turn. On a 1, no effect. On a 2 or a 3, you add 2 inches to the move characteristic for friendly disciples of Tzeentch units. And so this is all units, by the way, within 9 inches, not wholly within, just within. And then subtract 2 inches from the move characteristic of enemy targets. On a 4, you add 1 to hit rolls for friendly disciples of Tzeentch targets, and subtract 1 from enemy targets, and that is going to apply in both shooting and melee. So the big Skyfire builds that are currently popular, or the Flamers, are all going to get +1 to hit, potentially. That's every unit, so it's like multiple all-out attacks. Or if you roll a 5, you get to add +1 to wound to all Disciples of Tzeentch units within 9, and then subtract 1 to wound rolls from enemy targets, which is great. And then lastly, you add 1 to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons used by Disciples of Tzeentch targets and inflict D3 mortal damage on enemy targets. All of them are good options, but some of them are very good and some of them are really good into the current meta, which is cool. So that's excellent to see. And if you're looking at the points changes, with the exception of the Lord change going up 20 points, why do they hate my bin chicken so much? We've got a bunch of characters come down points as well. But importantly, the units that we're seeing lots and lots of play, specifically Skyfires, did not go up points. Flamers, which we're also seeing a lot of play, did not go up points. Somehow Kairos dodged going up any points as well when he's so incredibly good, which is pretty insane. And then unfortunately, yes, Blue Horrors and Brimstone Horrors did go up. Blue Horrors and Pink Horrors went up some points. But, you know, that's fine. They're basically immortal in some cases. They're so tough to get rid of. So, and they're still very, very cheap for like the wounds dense unit that you get for 130 points and 150 points respectively. So if you're a Tzeentch fan, I would say that you've gone up. A Tzeentch army, by the way, which were already doing well and already winning GTs and already doing okay. You've gone from like, you know, like maybe a B-A tier to a solid A-S tier if you're looking at ranking. So big thumb up for Tzeentch players. Slaanesh is the next army, and Slaanesh have had an excellent rules change for their battle trait with the temptation dice. Previously, if your opponent was to roll a 1 or a 2, they would take D3 damage. What happens is you give your opponent up to 3 dice, and they can use those dice for results of a 6 on different different dice rolls. Specifically, people always love the charge result because if you got 2, if the Slaanesh player gave you 2 dice, you could have 2 6s for a 12-inch charge. This now has changed because when you use the dice, you roll a dice, and on a 1 or 2, you take D3 mortal damage, and you have to re-roll the result. Therefore, you don't guaranteed get a 6. So your opponent now in this situation is risking using the dice and not even getting the result that they want. It's only going to happen a third of the time, but it does mean that the Hedonites Slaanesh player is going to be able to use their battle trait more than they previously were, seeing as absolutely everything in their army keys off being able to gain those bonuses from the temptation dice. So that is a great change. Then if we start looking at points, lots of units have come down points, but units that you're never going to want to take, like the Bladebringer, the Contorted Epitome, and Celeste, all of which I can't really see any argument for taking. In fact, all the chariots have come down points, but definitely don't do that. The funny bit is that Blissbarb Archers have gone up 10 points, which I don't really see the purpose of that. Like, Slaanesh doesn't do a ton of shooting. The Slaanesh lists that I saw play weren't necessarily overly using Blissbarb Archers anyway. I guess this brings them into like the same level as some other shooting units, but nowhere near as egregious as the shooting armies that exist out there. And when some units, like Long Strikes as an example, didn't see a points change for Stormcast, I don't see why Blissbarbs did. But there we go. And then you have the points have gone up by 10 points on the Slickblade Seekers, which again feels a little bit miserly because Slickblade Seekers were one of the only good units to take in like that combat role. So why like affect them so aggressively, and why not make it so that other units are a unit that you want to run more, like make Fiends cheaper or just better? as an example, would be something really good. But, you know, your key pieces like Shalaxi and also the Keeper of Secrets are still there. You've had a nice change to your allegiance ability, which is, you couldn't have asked for a bigger change, really. So I think overall, I'm going to say positive for Slaanesh. So I think we're in a fine spot. They are not struggling at the bottom of the table. They're in the mid-table slot. They can have whole recursion armies. I think if anyone was to ever build Glutos or Skolin ever and paint him, you've actually got an amazing army in here. But yeah, pretty solid army. Next army we're going to look at is the Maggotkin of Nurgle, and it gained an entire new battle trait in Burst Pustules. Now, Games Workshop aren't necessarily keen on doing a ton of work, so in my personal opinion, that means, or is pretty much, you know, solid information that you will be getting the Maggotkin of Nurgle Battle Tome sometime in the next year. A lot of people are saying January because that's when, like, the ordering on the roadmap was put out. So I'd say if you're a Nurgle fan, then expect to get yourself a new battle tome sometime soon. But the ability that you've had added is Burst Pustules. Each time a diseased enemy unit would have been destroyed, before the last model in the unit is removed from play, you roll a dice on a 3-up, pick another enemy unit within 9 inches to be diseased. Now, this is really nice because the amount of disease you can put out of your army is actually quite hard to do. You would see armies run like Horticulate Slimmocks and some trees just to try to add some additional ability to spread disease around, which wasn't really working overly well. And also then if you went and hit a disease unit and killed it, then you had to restart the process of diseasing everyone again. So now this lets you kill a disease unit and spread that disease around even better. That's actually really good, especially with the timing of when it's going to happen, because you're going to spread disease at the end of the turn. So it's actually pretty nice. Or maybe in the hero phase, whichever one it is. But either way, it's going to clock into the next step, which is really good. And in addition to that, so that's good. We love that. Everyone's really happy. You have points drops all around. You've got points drops on most of the characters, which you never take multiples of characters. So those points drops are pretty much nothing burgers in many ways. Rottiger's going from 480 to 500 to 480 doesn't improve the efficacy of the army at all. However, Blight King's going from 200 to 190 does a bit, but still, like, once you start writing the lists out, you'll see that it doesn't really make much of a points change. But the points have gone down a little bit. Fine, but you gain the whole battle trait. So Nurgle players, and Nurgle are also really not doing super well as an army. So Nurgle players get a thumb. Your army has got better. Skaven next, didn't get any rules changes, and the point changes you see here are just keeping them in line with where their battle tome is. And then, I mean, huge shout out to both Clan Rats and Rat Ogres being cheaper. Go watch my review. And in fact, actually, Skaven probably in an even better spot now that being able to use priority targets and shoot at the enemy general is limited to 12 inches means that Vizic, you probably are going to run in your list, is now further away from that unit to get shot. So big thumb in that situation. So probably Skaven have got better. Next up, Slaves to Darkness, and they got no rules changes, but they did get some points changes. And let me tell you, Slaves to Darkness players, you are dodging bullets and you're having the best time. Yes, Be'lakor did go up 30 points, but considering it's the best war scroll in Age of Sigmar 4, that's okay. That's fine. 440 points is still fine for just an absolutely OG gangster. It's cool. A bunch of other units came down points. They're nothing burgers. The Dark Oath Chieftain on Warsteed being 20 points cheaper is still 20 points cheaper. 160 points of rubbish. You don't need it, so don't take it. Nothing there. The big change... Sorry, it's really hard to say that. The big change is Chosen going up 10 points, and then also Varangard going up 10 points. Both of those were incredibly popular choices. Varangard, in fact, every list was a Varangard unit, as were Chosen. And then also they put up the points of Raptrix somewhere. I think somewhere they were. Why did they do that? Because they're incredibly broken, because they can fight twice. And that is an incredibly good mechanic. Why is it those two units that are more popular than Knights, which also have a good armor save and a survivable, or Warriors? Although there has been a good Warriors build. Shout out to Benjamin if he's listening. That's a great build. But it's because they can fight twice. So, like, take any unit that you have in your book and ask yourself, if you could once per battle fight with it twice, how many points you would add on to that unit, and then ask how it would compare to other units in your book. And so, Slaves to Darkness players, you just made out like bandits. You still got one of the better builds in the game. You've got one of the stronger builds in the game, and you're doing great. So big thumb ups to Slaves to Darkness players. You're probably staying in the S tier with things like Nighthaunt. You're really good with Rend as well, and Mortals. And Nighthaunt going away, when we start talking about Nighthaunt, you're in a great spot. Next up, we got Flesh Eater Courts. Flesh Eater Courts have had like a small quality of life change to their carnal throne. And then points changes, almost no points changes to speak of. Your army was rocking in September a 41% win rate, which does put it down at the bottom end of the competitive win rates. It might be that people aren't necessarily just running Flesh Eater Courts right now how they're wanting to play, unfortunately, but definitely with no massive points drops and no rules changes, I'm going to give Flesh Eater Courts a thumbs down. Okay, so I apologize about that. But good luck, Flesh Eater Courts players. I hope you can turn it around and do great. It's time, ladies and gentlemen, to talk about Nighthaunt. Beep, 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 beep. Okay, so the big bads of Age of Sigmar 4 so far. Tons of taunt, tons of podiums, loads of wins. They are the best army in the game, and they've taken several nerfs for that privilege. First one is to their battle formation, with their battle formation Deathstalkers. And Deathstalkers, you can see it right here, Deathstalkers have got a passive called There Is No Escape. Previously, the entire army could run, retreat, and charge. They've now changed it so that it is no longer a passive, and instead it's something that you declare in the movement phase. When you do that, that means it's an ability used by the player. There are abilities used by the unit and abilities used by the player. And because it's used by the player, you can only use it the one time. Therefore, you can't do it multiple times. And what that does, it allows a single unit to charge even if they ran or retreated. So instead of army-wide retreat and run or retreat and charge, it's now just a single unit that you do in your movement phase. So big thumb up. Excellent, great change. It was pretty wild that they allowed every single unit to do it when every other army had very severe stipulations on what they could do. So we love that. Congratulations. Sorry, Nighthaunt players. Heroic trait. They also changed the heroic trait, which allowed you to do two of... let me just check the name of it correctly. Two of the Aura of Dread abilities. So you could do two at the same time. Instead, now you can do an Aura of Dread even if even if you don't have the right keyword. So kind of like a side grade, probably a nerf. They also changed Dreadblade Harrows, of which every single list contained 2 units of 2. Changed the timing of Phantasmal Discorporation was the ability to teleport into only your movement phase, which is the right shout. If only they could make it so LRL didn't move 9,000 inches, we might have a normal looking game. So 3 big nerfs to the most aggressive army in the game. And then we had a bunch of points changes. Specifically, we had points go up on Harridans, which you would see a load of. You would normally see, sometimes you would see up to 60, maybe even 80 Harridans, but definitely 60. Hexwraiths, you sometimes would see 30. I have also seen 40. They went up 20 points, with Harridans going up 10. I should be clear. Bladegeist Revenants, you would also sometimes see 60 of those instead. And they have gone up an additional 10 points each. And when you do see them go up by 10, when they had 60, that does mean you are losing 60 points. Is that enough? I don't know. Ragnar the Grim Hailer also went up 10 points. But Lady Alinda didn't go up points, which is pretty nice. So they've been pretty conservative with the points changes, with the exception of the rules changes. And ultimately, there is still a lot of strength in Nighthaunt. They have an unrendable save. That's very good. They've got access to lots of very cool techie pieces. Alrak the Drowner is really popular. He didn't change points as well. And your units just got a little bit more expensive, but probably not as expensive as they should be. So I'm actually going to say that while this is, worse than they were, I reckon Nighthaunt are probably still at the top of the pile, along with LRL are definitely at the top, but these guys are probably up there. So I'm actually weirdly going to give it a thumb. Our next unit is OCR Bone Reapers. Now, Bone Reapers has been doing pretty good. Obviously, Nagash is very effective in Bone Reapers, outside of Bone Reapers, but that has seen constant play and has done really, really well. In addition, there's been a really fun fringe, maybe cringe, fringe list that's come out of Sweden that's now started permeating around with Mortek crawlers in the Mortek Ballistari battle formation, and the Mortek crawlers actually went down 20 points. It doesn't actually, taking 2 of them saves you 40 points, but doesn't really get you much in a very elite army. You can't do a lot with 40 points in this list. But, you know, Morghast Archive didn't change points, Nagash didn't change points. And if anything, the thing that we've been kind of talking about as this video's gone on is the fact that you could take Nagash for like 4 Archive and a bunch of stuff, then being a 1-drop because you now aren't worried so much about priority targets, give your opponent the turn, push your entire army forward, and then just be the underdog, get the double turn, and spank them and win the game. Feels pretty good. So I think OCR Bone Reapers get a giant thumb. You're doing great. You can carry on doing great. And Death Riders also didn't change points. I think if I don't say that, people on the internet will stab me. Like, Death Riders also didn't change points. So there we go. No rules changes for the OCR Bone Reapers, who are next. But, pretty excitingly, for Soulblight Gravelords, yeah, no rules changes for Soulblight Gravelords, but points changes all over the... Oh, wait, actually, no, there is a rule change. Let me come back. It's been a lot of content to go through. I hope you guys are enjoying the video. I apologize it's so long. They did change Torgillis, the auto-pick Chamberlain, in 2 different ways. Number 1, they changed his insanely good shooting attack, necrotizing bolts down to D6. Why it was ever 2D6, I don't know. He was better shooting you than some, like, loads of dedicated shooting units. But most importantly, the reason he got changed was because of his Deathly Invocation ability. Basically, he was able to double tap the healing for the army. It's now changed so that he cannot do Deathly Invocation on a unit that previously was benefited from Deathly Invocation, which was healing or returning models, which is a good change, but I don't think it makes Torgillis any worse, really. Depends on the units, depends how many units you've got. Maybe you don't see him as much, we'll see, but like that's a pretty good change because the amount of healing that could come out of this army was egregious. And I did think that with some of the other armies taking some points increases and being nerfed, this army might get better. But I would say I don't think they've necessarily... LRL are still going to kick their ass, I think. But, you know, Torgillis getting a nerf is actually a bigger blow than LRL took. Not as big as Nighthaunt took, in my opinion, but still pretty big. And then they also got a bunch of points changes. Specifically, Manfred was taken all the time, 20 points up. That's a bit of a shame. We also saw Graveguard, which were always taken, 2 units of 20, 1 unit of 20, got up by 10 points each. Is that enough? Fellbats, a great objective grabbers, not as good as Hunters of Haunchy, just as an FYI, but went up 10 points and are now 20 points more expensive than Hunters of Haunchy, who can deep strike, make a unit only charge on a D6. Insane. Absolutely insane. So, like for like, that's insane. Black Knights went up 20 points. A lot of people running a lot of Black Knights, which I think is... like that's fine. 20 points maybe is a bit aggressive. That puts them up there with like Rock Guts, which is kind of crazy in my opinion. And then we got some points changes on a bunch of stuff you don't really care about, like Kado. Radikar, the Beast coming down. I really like Radikar. I think Radikar could be a very good unit, but I think he probably needs like another like 40 points off Radikar to CMC play. But I think you could really play that. So, you know, come back to Radikar in like 6 months and maybe he's got some play. Start painting him now. Get him ready for 6 months' time, which would be good. So just to say, I'm going to give Soulblight Gravelords, unfortunately, a thumb down. Their one single kind of like key piece that everyone was taking got a big slap. But I still think they're in a really good spot. But I think that they didn't benefit from this update at all and instead got worse and therefore thumb down. Bone Splitters are also here in the destruction section. No points changes or rules changes or anyone playing them. Bone Splitters. Gloomspite Gitz is our next army, and again, one of the fearsome, like, top-end armies. Webspinner Shaman has had a rules change where he no longer counts 5 for holding an objective and now only counts as 2. That is the only rules change. It's also worth pointing out at this point, if we are talking about destruction, is about Kragnos. It's the only time I'm going to mention it. And I don't know who loves Kragnos. Let me know in the comments below if you love Kragnos. But Kragnos is just... I hate him so much. But he came down 100 points. Got 100 points cheaper and is available in every destruction army. Now, for that 100-point reduction, you lost the ability to get a 3d6 charge in your opponent's turn, because he allows you to do 3d6. He used to allow you to do 3d6 charges, and also that would include a counter charge. But no, that no longer counts, and it's just a regular charge. It will charge in your turn, and then everyone within range can do a 3d6 charge. The reason I don't like Kragnos is specifically for this, is because when you write a list in any other army, you then say, oh, what if I wanted army-wide, or like a load of units around him to 3d6 charge? And now that's become more viable for loads of the destruction armies. But the problem is, and I'm sure that's not a problem for destruction players, but the problem is this really invalidates a lot of the synergy and internal playstyle of how an army already plays. You just have the whole destruction faction just 3d6 charging at your face, which is very destruction themed, I get it. But from like a rules perspective, it doesn't, I really hate these plug and play characters, which like have this huge, a huge impact. I'd much rather him be like 800 points and just be a solo like beat stick that you could add into the army versus whatever this nonsense is. So that's Kragnos. That's what Kragnos got. Gloomspite Gitz was literally a one-trick pony at the competitive scene. It's just Rotgut Troggoths. That's all it is. Rotgut Troggoths, Trug, a Trug boss. That's it. And they aggressively pointed them. They added an additional 20 points to Rotgut Troggoths. It went from 170 for 3 for 190 for 3. So if you were to run the, as is tradition, 18 Rotgut Troggoths, it is going to cost you 120 points, and you probably do lose a unit. Will that reduce how... They weren't winning every event, by the way. They were effective. They weren't winning every event. They were not anywhere near as successful as Lumineth Realm Lords, who didn't really get nerfed, and Nighthaunt, who got a small downgrade. So actually, this is pretty aggressive for the Gloomspite Gitz roster, but really healthy for the internal balance. So it immediately gives a massive... you immediately get a massive thumb up from me in that regard. I think that's really excellent. However, they also didn't then touch a bunch of stuff which is like kind of been sleeper good. And if anything, Gloomspite Gitz players are going to be pretty happy, because some of the stuff that's really good, like Squigs, as an example, didn't get touched, and therefore they are laughing all the way to the bank. They also dropped the Arachnarok Spider with Flinger by 20 points, which is my Sisyphean Nightmare. I never want to engage with that. And also put Scragrot up by 10 points, which I feel is absolutely ludicrous. I would arguably see him come down points. For what is like a key element of the army, I'd like to see him down more like a 200 section, to be honest. I think that would be good. And also, they added 10 points onto Fellwater Troggoths, which I assume just means that you take your normal Fellwater Troggoths who are already in the cupboard, and then for 10 points more, you push them further back into the cupboard. I think is the right call there. I think I maybe would have even added an additional 10 points onto Rotguts. And my argument for that is that would really benefit the internal balance of this army. Make it so that Rotguts are really solid, and they are really solid. If they were 200 points for 3, then you've still got the 5-up ward, you've still got the 3-up save from being near the moon. You're in a really good spot. But then you would maybe start to look at other key pieces in your army, which is good. So basically, Gloomspite Gitz players are in a great spot now because your internal balance is better. And yes, you did have a path to victory with all trolls. You can still run all trolls, but maybe it's not quite as good. Maybe you'll take 2 units of 6. Maybe you'll take, maybe you won't take quite as many. But I think this has been a really positive change for Gitz, so it's getting a massive thumb up from me. Next up, we're going to talk about Ironjaws, and yes, Kragnos is cheaper, of course. But if we ignore that, there has been a rules change for Ironjaws, and it's pretty significant. Ironjaws are doing really badly in the game, so they need some big change. And this change is to its battle trait, calling the War, or the Ironjaws War. This used to be once per battle. It's now once per turn army in your hero phase. You pick up, in your charge phase. Once per turn army in the charge phase, and you can pick an Ironjaws hero to be the target, but not one that has previously done a war. So if you've got 4 heroes, you can call 4 wars across the game. And a war is Ironjaws units within 18 inches get +1 to charge and +1 to their attacks characteristic, which is really great. And seeing as all of your damage is done in melee for this army, +1 attack on all of those units, especially when you've got some great economies of scale, looking at you brutes and rages and stuff like that. It's Cool. So is it the change that they need? If you ever look at their battle trait sheet, it's like 2 abilities. I don't know if it's the upgrade they need, but it's an upgrade. So I'm pretty excited about that. In addition, they had some big points changes ish. Rages went down 10 points for 3. Gorgrunters went down 10. Wreckers went down 20. I don't know. Zogrok went down 30, and some heroes went down some amount of points. And you can now have, yes, 5 mega bosses or more Crusher if you really want to as a list, which is pretty fun, running those around. That is a fun, at least, list more than anything. But I don't know if this is going to be quite enough. You don't have enough recursion in this army. Loads of the armies that are doing really well have that recursion, or they have something like some really good shooting. Don't necessarily have this in this army. It's a thin roster with not necessarily loads of upgrades. And then their most recent inclusion, all of the Tusk Boss, just add more to that role without being as good in that role as those units. So like Tusk Boss went down points, but it's 280 points. So that pretty slow, pretty weak combat Tusk Boss is the same points as a 3-cast Slan who bring models back from the dead. So I think they really need to rethink Iron Jaws a little bit. They need more battle traits. They need a little bit more, but I'm hoping this is going to help improve their win rate, but I don't think it's enough, so I'm going to give it a down, unfortunately. No rules changes for Cruel Boys, but Kragnos is 100 points cheaper, just as an FYI. Anyway, please ban him. You have got some point changes. In pretty wild news, obviously, as I said at the beginning of this video, with these rules and these points updates having been done like 6 to 8 weeks ago, whenever they were done, they missed the Monster Killers spam lists that you've seen for Cruel Boys. Therefore, they haven't seen a points update. Although, if they're not doing points updates until every 3 months, you've got 3 more months to run a bunch of Monster Killers, which is something we've seen a lot of. We have seen some points reductions, though. Gobstrat got cheaper. Killer Boss got cheaper. The Snatcher Boss Swamp Boss Scumdrek got cheaper, which I think that's kind of fun because you can still run in with the Hobgrot Slitters. And then the Marshcrawler Sloggoth also got cheaper. I think Cruel Boys are really tied to their battle traits, and they're kind of the Skaven of 2024. You're going to play them. Sometimes it's going to go really well. Sometimes it's not going to. And obviously people have been seeing, you've seen people excited about the fact that they can run a bunch of monster killers. But I think they're a fine army. They're not in the doldrums on the win rates. They're doing fine. Where are they? They're doing okay, actually. So I don't think they're in a bad spot. So they're 45% win rate. Yeah. I mean, they're doing okay. So just have fun with them. I'm going to give them a thumb. They're doing cool. I don't know what changes I would have really liked to have seen for them, to be honest. But they're doing good. I think it's really to do with the allegiance ability. That's what it's there for. No rule changes for ogres, but in what is tragic news, some points changes. I'm going to talk about this a lot. I'm furious, because ogre gluttons went up 30 points. Was it like the build? Yes, it was. Were they good for like 2 weeks? The answer is yes. Was that 2-week period when everyone was still learning how to play the game? Yes. And so was it surprising that just a ton of dudes running at you and beating you up was strong? No. So this 30 points upgrade on the Gluttons, it feels egregious in my personal opinion. I mean, it was nice. Gluttons were good once in the 10 years of Age of Sigmar for like 8 weeks, which is more than they've ever had in the past. So RIP all my Glutton fans. I mean, I think still 250 is probably okay if you compare them to like, you know, if 250 you compare them to something like Kurnoth Hunters, like you got a lot of wounds on there, which is pretty good. But seeing as Varangard went up 10 points, I think genuinely they're having an insane time in the points department, which is genuinely a department I want to hang out with because I reckon they're just doing loads of LSD. Anyway, some other units went down points. All of them, like, whatever. Scrap Launcher go down 20 points, who cares? Lead Belchers didn't change. They're still rubbish. Man-Eaters went down 10 points, still rubbish as well. So, yeah, like, really, this is a book where maybe the internal balance is going to be improved. Iron Guts didn't change, which is nice. Iron Guts are really good. Also, another good thing is the Icebrow Hunter and also I don't think they changed the dogs, Frost Sabers, which is pretty good because you need those for battle tactics. They're still incredibly competitive at 70 points. So you got the opportunity to do battle tactics. You got a lot of bodies you can do you could do objectives with. But your major problem is LRL are probably just better than you in every way, as are Slaves to Darkness. So I think that's a big, tough shout for you. So Ogre tribes, going to get a thumb down. Sad times. Sons of Behemoth are also here, and Kragnos got cheaper. And therefore, Sons of Behemoth get what they always get, thumbs down. There didn't seem to be many points changes to the Regiments of Renown. In fact, none, which, if point changes aren't changed for the next 3 months, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the best Regiment of Renown has not been changed. The Saviors of Cinderfall are still 230 points for 24 wounds on a 3-up save with a 4-up, 5-up ward save, whatever they might be. Listen, if you're playing Order and if you want the most fun next 3 months that you're going to play, go and get this box. Or don't even get this box. Get 5 models that are like this box. Yeah, find like some whatever you want to use. Yeah, go and run the Saviors of Cinderfall in their games. You're going to have an amazing time. That's it. That's the deep dive. I'm probably going to follow this up with a tier list for where I think armies are to where they are to where they're going to be. The big question is let's go look at our stats profile again, actually, and ask ourselves this question. Let's look at the top. Lumineth, Realm Lords, and Nighthaunt, they have affected, right? And gone down a little bit. I still think they're probably top of the pile. I think Slaves to Darkness are also top of the pile as well. I think Gloomspite Gitz has taken a big nerf. Are they going to be able to side grade to other units? Maybe. Sinesh, this is September's results, by the way. KO got better, technically. Sinesh got better, technically. Daughters of Cain technically got better. Sylvaneth also technically got better, and Zeech also got much better. More tribes got slammed. Fire Slayers are fine. Stormcast Eternals are fine. They're in that same spot. Seraphon arguably got better because it didn't touch Hunters or Haunchy. I'm going to say they're about the same, but maybe got better. Cruel Boys, keeping about the same. Bone Reapers got much better. Soulblight Gravelords, I think, maybe a little bit worse. Cities, maybe a little bit better, but probably not. Skaven, much better with a book release. Sons of Behemoth should go out of the game. Blades of Corn definitely didn't get better. Flesh Eater Courts didn't get better. Magic and Nurgle did get better, so we might see a unit lift up, but I think that's because we're going to be seeing a Battle Tome come out soon. Iron Jaws maybe got a little bit better, not by much, and Deepkin definitely didn't get better. So I would say it's incredibly incremental changes at the bottom of the pile and incredibly incremental changes at the top of the pile, and I don't think that we're seeing enough. As well as, unfortunately for me, some core changes I would have liked to have seen. I would really like to see the ability to shoot your opponent's turn just gone out of the game, but I think arguably it should be 2 CP if you're going to keep it in the game. And the biggest bugbear that everyone has had in Age of Sigmar 4 has been manifestations. And they've done very little to affect manifestations at all. Like, it's kind of odd, like, especially for players and armies that can't really involve themselves in being multicast play styles. You can't put a lot of manifestations on the board, so you don't engage. Cool, I'll bring the Incarnate. Well, it's unsurprising that the armies that can cast a lot of spells are also good at casting spells and also shutting spells down. Therefore, if you're not very good in the casting phase, you're even, worse. LRL, good at casting spells. Nighthaunt, okay at casting spells. So, like, those are armies that are able to engage in that part of the game. And from a balance perspective, I'm not even sure I want to see much change from a balance perspective with manifestations. I just want them to go away. I want them to cost points. I want them to be a cost that you pay for because maybe it improves your game, not something everyone has to bring in a box to put on the board and put around. I know not everyone agrees with me, and I'd love you to tell me if you don't agree with me, but that's the biggest miss. Covering Fire, the General's Regiment change, I like, but I think actually, in effect, we'll end up with more one-drop double alphas. Well, I guess it's a double beta, but like whatever. Like, I think we're going to end up with more one-drop alphas, and then they didn't affect the biggest one-drop alphas, specifically, like, Slaves to Darkness is a good example. So you might end up with a game state that's more polarizing, but we don't know. Ultimately, though, especially in this roundup, I want to say Age of Sigmar 4 is a really fun game to play, right? Really fun game to play. And the game is in a really good spot. Game's in an okay spot. I can't, in all honesty, say it's in a really good spot, because it isn't. There's some pretty massive discrepancies between armies at the top and armies at the bottom. But Games Workshop always make the armies, like, you could have bought an LRL army, like literally the same LRL army, like 3 or 4 years ago, and just been cruising Like, no one's ever got so much value having painting 20 Sentinels, right? Ever. So, like, Games Workshop do just have their, like, units that they love and units that they don't love. Like, they're never going to make Fiends of Sinesh good. They're never going to make Slangor good for any particular reason. They're never going to try really hard with Fire Slayers because they just don't. That's just what they do. And so, you know, it really depends on your armies and what you pick, but it doesn't mean you can't have a load of fun on the tabletop. And that's really important. Also, remember when I'm talking about tournaments, and I'm talking about maybe a top end of tournaments. Your skill level is really dictated by how much you play. And if you don't play very much, it doesn't really matter. Go and have fun, because the game is really fun. It's engaging. Lots of stuff is happening. Lots of people, if you don't play much, you're going to put some spells on the board. It's going to look cool as fuck. Okay? That's great. Go do that. Go have a good time. Okay, I want that to be clear. These balance updates are a load of pissing and moaning from a bunch of people like me. And really, I don't think that's going to impact how much fun you're going to have on the tabletop much. So go have fun. That's what I'd like you to do. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye.